So, section 15 now. This section I know is also a little bit confusing, but Nietzsche's returning here to the question that he's raised a few times of why do people want to know things? What is this human desire to know? So just so you know, when he says science here, just think of knowledge in general. It's a translation issue. The German word for science and knowledge, it's the same word, Wissenschaft. So when he says science here, think of knowledge in general. So think of like your professors, think of all these IT people who are so important for our contemporary world, skilled technicians, right? He says, why do people want to know? And he says, it's actually more tricky than it looks. People want to know just sort of because they want to know. But Nietzsche says it's not actually the truth that they want. Remember, he's the rare philosopher who thinks that truth itself is overrated. He says it's the pursuit of truth that they like. Okay, he gives a quote from Lessing on page 73 that says that the search for the truth means more than the truth itself. And that's true of everyone, Nietzsche says, who loves truth. So he says, look, the scientists, they want the truth, but think about this. They're never satisfied when they find the truth, when they find an answer. Right? Let's say a chemist that she has a question about elastic bonds between such and such polymers. Okay? Now, she goes to the lab, she spends years working on this, she hires all these assistants, spends all this money, runs into all these roadblocks and setbacks, and then finally cracks the code and gets the answer. Well, does she retire? Does she write a book on it and then she's like, no, I'm good? No. She just comes up with a new question and a new problem. Right? If you think about physicists who look into black holes and then they're like, well, wait, maybe there's wormholes. People who love knowledge are constantly just opening up a new search for themselves. It wouldn't be accurate to say they're not happy. It would be accurate, though, to say they're never satisfied, that they always want something else and something new. So once more, Nietzsche is here making a point about a particular subject, science and knowledge acquisition. He's also trying to show you something for your own life. Nietzsche is saying that the search for truth should never stop, that we should always keep pushing ourselves and expanding ourselves in whatever our passionate interests are. One way to think about this is that Nietzsche is much more interested in the process than the product. Nietzsche is much more interested in you flying off of the couch and running to wherever you're going. He doesn't care where you're going. And the point he's making here is that even scientists, even inventors and other tech people, they sure seem like they're devoted entirely to just the result, right? They seem like they want the truth and an answer, and that they're going to then apply that in technology for some specific benefit, right? And he just says, no, even them, they do it for the process, the search for the hunt. That's what it's all about. And so Nietzsche's trying to remind you that that's probably true for you too, so you need to find the hunt that you find most thrilling. The results of it don't matter. Whether it's helpful or useful to other people doesn't matter. Whether it ends in failure doesn't matter. Think about it. They announce Nobel Prizes every now and then, right? They give out, maybe 50 a year, total. Which means all the other people working in the arts, because there's Nobel Prizes for literature, all the other people working in the sciences, that they don't get Nobel Prizes. They don't get theories named after them. They don't get art movements named after them. It doesn't matter, Nietzsche says. You don't become a scientist because you're looking for some specific answer that if you find it, you'll retire. You don't become a scientist in order to get a Nobel Prize. You become a scientist because there's something in you pushing you towards that. No rhyme or reason to it. So that's what Nietzsche thinks is interesting. Even people pursuing the truth and answers, there's no answer to why they want the truth. There's no logical reason for them to spend all this money, time, blood, sweat, and tears chasing this dream, except that it's their dream. And for Nietzsche, that's reason enough. That's reason enough. Remember, that's what he says at the bottom of page 73. He says, science, knowledge, art, religion. Okay, science, art, and religion. They're not actually opposites. They're just three different ways of fulfilling the same basic human desire. That's to make existence appear comprehensible and therefore justified. So let me say that again. Art, science, and religion are not totally different. They're just three different ways, Nietzsche says, of fulfilling the same basic human desire. That's the desire to try to make sense out of this crazy world and to justify it. That is, to give yourself a story that you can live by and a reason to get out of bed in the morning. If the content of that is physics, cool. If the content of that is Hindu gods, cool. If the content of that is the Catholic God, cool. If the content of that is philosophy or cubist painting, whatever. All of it's good. All of it's cool. But Nietzsche wants you to see that science, religion, philosophy, art, knowledge, all these things, they show us what human beings have in common. We don't know where we fit in. We don't know where we fit in the universe. We don't know where we fit in relative to other people, family, nation, city. We don't even know who we are deep down. And so we want to find that out. And for each one of us, that quest is exciting. It's also never ending. And Nietzsche says he wants to get you to a place where you're comfortable with that. You're comfortable with recognizing that you don't know things, but you want to know things. And that you'll pursue knowledge of these things, and you'll never quite get it, but that's fine. Same thing with scientists. They get an answer, it just creates new questions. They found the quantum particles. Then they realized, they had to develop quantum mechanics to discover or to answer all the questions that they just raised for themselves. Okay? All human life is like that. Every step we take presents us with more steps that we have to take. That's fine. Love the journey, right? Don't worry about the destination. Love the journey. And we can see that spirit, that very Nietzsche attitude on page 75 at the end of section 15, where he says his attitude and your attitude should be the same, he thinks, is that he's concerned but not comfortless. He's permitted to witness the enormous struggles of life and all the transitions that they involve. And he says, alas, he says, the magic of these struggles is such that he who really sees them must also want to take part in them. So he thinks that if he shows you that life is constant motion, building up and tearing down, giving form through Apollo, and then confusing and messing up the form through Dionysus, that you will embrace that in your own unique way. Maybe you'll invent a new art movement or a new philosophy or make a new scientific discovery, but you'll find a way to make form, change things, rewrite the script in your own way. And that moves us into section 16, where Nietzsche says a few things. Primary message here is that music is the best of all artworks. Shout out to all you instrument players and singers out there. Music is the best of all artworks. Why is that? Because it shows this constant, unending transition, which is life. And it's the artwork which most clearly says, hey, the content doesn't matter. It's the change and the transition, the dynamic nature of music that matters, and the dynamic nature of life that matters. The content of a song, say the lyrics, don't really matter. The content of your pursuit and journey in life don't really matter. That you're making a journey matters. Okay, that's the primary point, is art is the best artwork because it's music is the best artwork because it most resembles what a human life should be. It's the deepest truth of the universe. A secondary point is this, is that beauty and realism are not really great guides to what makes artwork good. We've already developed that point some today. Artwork being relatable to what you already are, a story being realistic or like a quote good story that makes sense is not a good guide for what makes art powerful and important. And beauty is not the only guide to what makes art important or good. Now, beauty matters for Nietzsche. Realism he hates, that's Euripides. Beauty he's okay with, because that's Apollo. So his point here is sort of subtle. He says beauty is not the only way to assess artwork. We see that on the top of page 77, through top in the middle. Okay, so beauty is an important part of artwork. It's just not the only important part of artwork. But realism, a good story, things you can relate to, expressing emotions that you've felt before, Nietzsche thinks all that's pretty weak sauce when it comes to artwork. Okay? So we'll turn that into a question now before I go on and say what he says about music. Defend yourself against Nietzsche. Nietzsche says realism in artwork, not that big of a deal, not that important. He'd also say emotions that we see in artwork, heartbreak because a relationship is over, proud mother and father smiling at their children when they've accomplished something. You go, nah, whatever. He says you had those emotions yourself. Why do you need artwork to show them again? Right? He thinks something more intense than sort of everyday pleasant emotions or everyday sadness. Art can give us something more intense and more interesting than that. He also says artwork which is relatable, where you can identify with and see yourself in the characters. He says that's not very interesting. It's not very interesting either. Because he says you already are that person, or you used to be in the past. So insofar as you want to relate to or identify with a character in a story, you're basically asking to stay the same. So, I want to hear you all push back on that a little bit. Okay? I want you to try to defend your artistic taste, because even if you disagree with Nietzsche's going to say, okay, your likes and your dislikes really say something important and interesting about who you are. Nietzsche's also going to say, hey, you don't need to be me. Nietzsche famously said, I can't remember the exact words off the top of my head, but he basically said, I don't want any followers. I want to be the philosopher who people read, but nobody repeats what I say. Right? So you don't have to agree with any of the philosophers we read in our class. You just have to read them and try to understand them. But Nietzsche especially is going to go, oh, please don't agree with me. Right? He wants to prompt your disagreement. So, because Nietzsche himself is begging for you to disagree with him, And because Nietzsche says your own personal likes and dislikes aren't just random and arbitrary, but they show something interesting about who you are. He's going to want to hear you push back and disagree with him. So for those of you who do like realistic stories, for those of you who do want to identify with the main character or somehow relate to this story or the characters, and those of you who like seeing emotions that you've been through before, the same joys, the same sadness, who want to see those represented in artworks, try to justify that. Okay, I won't use Nietzsche here to attack your views. I just want to hear them. And if I ask you follow-up questions, know that I'm not trying to deny the truth of what you're saying. I'm just trying to draw out even more truth to what you're saying. So let's relate that. That's the question. Pause the recording now if you haven't and think about that. Why do you like seeing emotions in artwork? Why do you like a good story? And why do you like relating to the main characters? Now we'll relate that, we'll connect all that to music, because that's what this last section is primarily about. One of the things that Nietzsche points out, and this is really page 77 going over to 79, it's this long quote from another philosopher, where this other philosopher, Schopenhauer, but basically it's Nietzsche's point too, is that music is that strange art that you can pair with everything else, but also which can stand alone on its own. So music can be paired with words, which are basically poetry or literature. But you can also have instrumental music. You can pair music with a stage play, which we call opera. Okay? You can walk around in your daily life with your iPod or whatever in, right? With your headphones in, and listen to music, and then it feels like a soundtrack to your life, right? Okay? So Nietzsche, through this other philosopher, asked this question of why is it that music, of all the arts, seems to fit with everything else in your life? It fits with the sad times in a way that, like, painting doesn't really typically capture sadness, but about half the songs in the world are sad songs. Okay? It can fit with, say, the weather. When it's rainy outside, you want to hear a certain kind of music. And he says, well, why is that? We see it on page 78. It says, music is suitable to any scene, any action, every event, any environment in which it's played. It discloses to us each time its most secret meaning, and it appears to be the most accurate and distinct commentary on the world, no matter what scene, action, event, etc. Music lets us see all the possible events of life and the world passing by within ourselves. Yet, this is what's important, if you reflect on it, you can't assert any similarity between that piece of music and the things that you're thinking about. Think about how mystical music actually is. So when a painting's happy, it usually shows a happy person, right? Or when a painting's scary, it's because it shows something scary. But when music is scary, when it sort of gets your heart racing, it's not like it sounds like a car wreck. Or the music that they put in horror movies, that sort of sound. That's not what serial killers sound like. So this is the mystical thing about music. And Nietzsche says this is proof that artwork expresses the most deep, cosmological, universe-wide forces and powers possible. Because something about music, say moving strings at a certain vibration to produce a certain pitch of sound, a sound that doesn't sound like anything else in the world, right? Like a C flat doesn't sound like language, it doesn't sound like animals, right? It can make you feel the deepest emotions. It can remind you of the past, even though it does not resemble the past at all. You can hear a song that you've never heard before in a coliseum with 30,000, 40,000 other people, and all you start jumping up and down on the same beat at the same time, feeling the same specific form of excitement. Why is that? It's because music, Nietzsche says, is a direct expression of the whole world itself. Why can a song you've never heard before remind you of a past? Because music lets you time travel, basically. Why does a song that you've never heard before evoke the same feeling and the same dancing in you as some stranger who you've never met standing 10 feet away? Because the music is inside of you, inside of them at the same time. So it lets you almost like swap bodies with other people. It lets you connect with them, Nietzsche says. So music can connect strangers in the instant. It can transport you back into time through memory. And it does this more than the other arts. They can do it too, but music does it the most, basically. Why is that? Because music in particular, and artwork in general, taps into something mystical and mysterious. Something hiding behind the veil, behind the the screen that blocks us from seeing things. There's something invisible, because music is literally invisible, that music gives us access to. There is something common, because when you hear music, the same vibrations are happening inside the other person at the same time. So it connects us. So music draws us together. It connects us to the things that are very real but invisible. And it can evoke any emotion and make you think of any scene if it's the right song. So music is crazy powerful, right? So that's the final point here. Okay, we see it on page 79. Nietzsche finally finishes up this long quote from this other philosopher named Schopenhauer, and he says, "Now we understand that music is the language of the will of the universe." Okay, it's the universe itself directly speaking to us. He says, music gives shape and body to this mystical spirit world which speaks to us, and which, although invisible, is so full of movement and life. And he says, so, page 80, he says, the nature of art can't be reduced to beauty. Okay, beauty's a part of art, but he says, think about like dubstep, or think about like a Wu-Tang song. There's nothing beautiful about that. Think about not the Mona Lisa or Impressionist paintings, but think about, say, abstract art. Or think about Renaissance art, where it's Christ being crucified. Or a Picasso painting like Guernica, where it's animals getting bombs dropped on them in war. Nothing beautiful about these artworks. And yet, everyone recognizes these are great artworks. So what's going on? And Nietzsche says, well, I'll tell you one more time. And then we'll end our reading of Nietzsche. He says, I'll tell you one more time. Beauty is part of it, but beauty is not the only part of it. Truth is definitely not an issue. So what's going on in art? He says, why do we like to see destruction in artwork, for instance? Why do we want to see the hero negated and annihilated? And he says, because quality artwork calls out, we believe in eternal life. Even when the hero is destroyed, life goes on. Life cannot be eliminated. Apollo overcomes suffering by adding beauty, through which we gain victory over the suffering which is natural to all human life. And then Dionysus responds, be as I am, the primal mother, eternally creative beneath the surface of incessantly changing appearances, eternally forcing life into existence, and forever satisfying myself with these changing appearances. That's what music does. Out of thin air, or moving a few little instruments of wood and string, it produces a giant wall of sound out of nowhere. That wall of sound connects you to anyone else who hears it. It connects you to your past memory, and it makes you want to move. So it connects you to the earth through your feet. The music comes from nowhere, and then it can constantly be repeated again and again and again. Because that's what life is. Life is called up from the dust, and then we all return to dust. But Nietzsche says, just like artwork, when we arise up, something magical and mystical happens. Something way beyond what we can explain. And that's the best part of life. The trick is how to seize the day in your own life so that your life resembles an artwork. Out of nothing, with no clear explanation, you carve out a meaning that's totally unique to yourself. And then that meaning connects people. It says something about the world, but it also says something about you as a unique individual. And then when one day your number is called and you die, you'll believe in eternal life, Nietzsche says, because you'll have created something that's going to live past your own life. Your life as artwork can echo through the ages in the same way that we still read about Socrates today, even if sometimes we read people trash talking him like Nietzsche did. How we still read Nietzsche today. How we still name drop Beethoven, Bach, Wagner, who's a friend of Nietzsche's, Homer, who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, right? How we still talk about Alfred Hitchcock, even though he's dead, right? That we still listen to Jimi Hendrix, he's dead. You have to take that as a model for your own life. Not that you have to be an artist, but you have to do something like Jimi Hendrix, where I think he learned to play the guitar upside down because he was left-handed or something, right? You've got to find something like that in your own life. That will redeem all the suffering of your life. That will justify everything you do. Whether it's true or false, moral or immoral, won't matter. You'll create a giant shining light that will inspire others to create their own unique shining lights. So, that's Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy. I know there's a lot of name dropping in there. Nietzsche loves to hear himself create a colorful metaphor. They're not always clear. They're always beautiful, but not always clear. So as always, if you have any questions or you want to continue the conversation that Nietzsche started, send me an email and we'll talk about it more. But for now, we're going to wrap up the Birth of Tragedy. Thank you for this. I'm looking forward to hearing your comments about this later on. Thank you, everyone.